Today, the world around you probably feels stable. Trees stand tall, birds call from rooftops. Streets are calm and ordinary. But there was a time when Earth twisted into something unrecognizable, and the creatures that lived here faced a choice so brutal it rewrote evolution itself. The air swung between burning heat and freezing cold. Forests collapsed. Food vanished. Predators died. Entire ecosystems crumbled like sand in a storm. And in the middle of that chaos, our early mammal ancestors did something unbelievable. They shrunk. Not symbolically, not slowly. They became creatures so small they could hide in cracks no bigger than your thumb. They became warm-blooded sparks of life in a world falling apart. Their survival meant squeezing into burrows, eating anything they could find, and running through the night while giants around them starved and vanished. Here is the part that should make you really pay attention. That ancient crisis almost erased the entire future of mammals, including us. But those tiny, shrew-sized survivors kept going. Their bodies raced, their brains sharpened, their senses strengthened. And from creatures smaller than the palm of your hand came every mammal alive today: cows, whales, lions, apes, and eventually humans. If you are watching this in Manila between classes, or in Chicago after dinner, or somewhere else in the world trying to fall asleep, get ready, because the story you are about to hear will change the way you look at small animals. Forever. This is the moment when evolution proved that power does not always belong to the biggest. Sometimes it belongs to the ones small enough to slip through the cracks of a dying world and carry the future on their tiny backs. You know that moment when you realize the world you thought was solid can fall apart in an instant. Imagine that feeling stretched across millions of years, a slow-motion disaster that almost erased the tiny sparks that would one day become every mammal on Earth. That is the story hidden beneath our feet, a story from a time when the world belonged to giants and our ancestors were just bit players waiting for their chance to survive. But survival was not guaranteed. In fact, there was a moment when it almost ended before it even began. Back then, the world was ruled by creatures so massive they made everything else look small. Towering reptiles thundered across the land, creatures with jaws like traps and bodies built for power. Between their footsteps lived modest early mammals, not tiny like mice yet, but mid-sized creatures that kept to the shadows. They hunted insects, nibbled plants, cared for their young, and existed quietly in a world that barely noticed them. For a long time this balance held. Then the planet changed its mind. It started with fire. Not the small kind that burns in a forest, but planet-shaping fire from deep inside the earth. Volcanoes erupted again and again, filling the sky with ash that turned day into twilight. Sunlight weakened, temperatures dropped, plants withered, the animals that depended on them starved, the giants who once seemed unstoppable began to fall. And before life could recover, something worse arrived. An enormous rock from space came screaming through the atmosphere and struck the planet with more force than every nuclear bomb in human history combined. In a single moment, the sky turned into a wall of heat. Forests became flames. Oceans hurled themselves onto continents. And when the firestorm faded, a freezing darkness settled over everything. Dust and smoke rose into the sky and blocked the sun for years, so long that entire generations of animals lived and died without ever seeing a real sunrise. This was not just a disaster. It was a reset, a mass extinction. For the rulers of the world, it was the end. For the survivors hiding in burrows and cracks in the earth, it was the beginning of something new. Our mammal ancestors were never the strongest or the biggest. They could not outrun the giants. They could not fight off the predators. But when the world collapsed, they had something the giants did not. They could adapt. They could eat almost anything. They could hide. They reproduced quickly. And as the planet spiraled into volcanic winters and poison skies, being small and flexible became the only winning strategy left. Imagine being one of them during those endless dark years. Every day was a battle for warmth and food. Every night was a search for anything edible. The world above was too dangerous, full of falling ash and freezing winds. But underground, in tiny burrows warmed by their own bodies, life held on. These early mammals listened to the distant rumble of collapsing forests and volcanic thunder, waiting for a world that might never recover. But it did. Slowly the sun returned. Plants crept back. In the ruins of a shattered ecosystem, the giants were gone, but the small survivors remained. They did not know it, but they had just passed the greatest test life had ever thrown at them. Everything that would come later, from tiny shrews to humans walking on the moon, depended on those small creatures refusing to die when the world almost ended. Long before mammals became the tiny night creatures that would one day inherit the world, they lived lives that looked completely different. If you could travel back hundreds of millions of years, you would not find shrews or mice or small burrow hiders. Instead, you would meet creatures that looked strange and powerful. Mid-sized animals with sharp teeth, strong legs, and the confidence of species that believed they had a secure place in the world. These early mammal-like ancestors walked tall in landscapes filled with reptiles of every shape and size. They were not giants, but they were not small either. Some were as large as wolves. Others were stocky herbivores, built for strength rather than speed. They hunted, they grazed, they raised young, they fought for territory. And for a moment in Earth's long timeline, it seemed like they were on their way to becoming something even greater. They lived in ecosystems that were complicated and thriving. Towering reptiles roamed nearby, but these early mammals were not weak or helpless. Their bodies were warm-blooded, which gave them speed and endurance. Their brains were more advanced than many of the reptilian species around them, which helped them adapt and solve problems. They occupied roles as predators and prey in an ancient world that felt stable and predictable. But stability in Earth's history has always been an illusion. Everything started to shift as the climate began behaving strangely. Seasons grew harsher. Temperatures swung wildly. The air itself changed in ways the animals had never experienced. Fires became more common. Storms grew stronger. Entire forests transformed as plants struggled to adapt to the new rhythms of heat and cold. At first, the changes were slow enough that the large mammals kept living as they always had. They hunted when food was plentiful. They raised families. They explored new territories when old ones dried up. But generation after generation, the world kept twisting into something less familiar. The balance that had once let mid-sized mammals thrive started to crumble. When food was abundant, these creatures could support their large bodies. But during the extreme climate swings, plants vanished from entire regions. Rivers dried out. Prey animals disappeared. Large bodies that once seemed like advantages became heavy burdens that demanded too much energy. It became harder and harder for mid-sized mammals to keep up with the changing world. Some species migrated in desperate attempts to outrun the shifts in climate. Others fought for shrinking resources. Many simply faded away as their ecosystems collapsed around them. For a long time, it looked like these powerful early mammals might survive the crisis through strength and endurance. They had done it before when predators threatened them or droughts challenged them. But this time, the danger was everywhere at once. No corner of the world offered a safe place for large animals to hide. Slowly, a new pattern began to appear in the fossil record. Each new generation of mammals was a little smaller than the last, shrinking was not a choice. It was the only way to survive a world that was swinging out of control. Being small meant needing less food. Being small meant slipping into new hiding places and new habitats. Being small meant life could continue when everything else was falling apart. Before the fall, mammals had walked with power. But as the climate spiraled deeper into chaos, their size would determine their fate. Only the ones willing to shrink would live long enough to see what came next. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the world you knew has vanished. Not slowly, not over generations, but suddenly in a wave of destruction so massive that almost nothing survives. That is what happened during the Permian-Triassic extinction, the worst catastrophe life on Earth has ever faced. Scientists sometimes call it the Great Dying because calling it anything else feels too small. Around 95% of all species disappeared. Entire forests turned into ash. Oceans lost their oxygen and became poisonous. Volcanoes erupted for so long that they poured toxic gases into the sky for millions of years. The world overheated, then froze, then overheated again. It was like the planet kept pressing a reset button, wiping away everything that had tried to grow back. In that chaos, big creatures had almost no chance. Large bodies need steady food and stable environments. They need predictable seasons and healthy ecosystems. None of that existed anymore. Massive predators that had once ruled the planet wandered across empty landscapes searching for prey that no longer existed. Plant eaters starved as forests collapsed. Even the oceans, which had once been full of life, became deadly traps where fish suffocated and coral reefs crumbled to dust. The Great Dying did not care about strength or speed or size. It cared only about who could outlast the chaos. In the ruins of this broken world, a brutal new rule emerged. The smaller you were, the better your chances of surviving. Tiny creatures needed fewer calories, which was important when food was almost impossible to find. They could hide in cracks underground or inside fallen logs where the worst heat and poison could not reach them. They bred faster, which meant more chances for their species to continue even if many individuals died. And they could adapt quickly because each new generation arrived with tiny changes that helped them handle the shifting environment. Picture a world where smoke blocks the sun and the ground shakes with constant eruptions. Everything big is struggling. Everything big is hungry, but in the shadows, small animals scurry through the ruins. They sneak into places larger creatures cannot reach. They survive on insects and roots and anything edible enough to keep them alive. Their heartbeats are fast. Their lives are short. But they are survivors in a world that has turned into a giant test of endurance. It is during times like these that evolution works at lightning speed, when only the tiny creatures keep surviving generation after generation. They become the foundation for the future. Traits that once seemed unimportant suddenly become life-saving. Being small is no longer a weakness, it is the ultimate survival skill. The Great Dying did not just wipe out life, it reshaped it. It forced the world to start over, using the only animals tough enough to endure the nightmare. From these survivors, new species would evolve. They would rebuild ecosystems from scratch. And among those early small survivors were the ancestors of mammals. They did not know it at the time. They only knew they were hungry and desperate and clinging to life in a world that seemed determined to erase them. But by staying small, they had unlocked the one strategy that could carry them through extinction and into a future they would one day dominate. If you could watch evolution happen in fast forward, it would look like a world shrinking itself to survive. At first, you would see mammals that were sturdy and confident, animals the size of badgers or small wolves moving through forests and hunting along riverbanks. They were not giants, but they were strong enough to stand their ground. Then the climate swings hit harder. Heat waves scorched the land. Sudden cold snaps froze entire regions. Food became unpredictable, drying up in some places and rotting away in others. Generation after generation, the world pushed life into a tighter corner. In this time-lapse view, those mid-sized mammals would begin to change almost too slowly for the eye to notice. A slightly smaller body here, a little less muscle there. Some pups, born undersized, that somehow survived better than the larger ones. At first it would look like random variation, but nature is not random. Nature always keeps score. The individuals with smaller bodies were the ones who needed less food to stay alive. They slipped into hiding spots that larger animals could not enter. They could wait out deadly weather in burrows and cracks, while the bigger creatures collapsed in the open. So the small ones lived long enough to have more children, and their smallness spread through the population without anyone understanding why. As the time-lapse speeds up, you would see this pattern repeat again and again. Every few hundred years, the average body size dips. What once looked like strong, mid-sized mammals now looks more like sleek, rabbit-sized creatures darting through dying forests. Their bones are lighter. Their legs are faster. They move with the tension of animals that live in constant danger. Food shortages force them to eat anything: insects, roots, seeds, tiny animals hiding under stones. Every calorie becomes precious. Every moment becomes a calculation between risk and survival. Then the world tightens its grip again. Volcanic ash blankets the sky. Sunlight weakens. Winters stretch so long that entire generations grow up knowing only cold. The time-lapse shows mammals shrinking even faster now. Their bodies adapt to life underground, where temperatures are steady and predators struggle to reach them. They become creatures of the soil and shadows. Eventually, you reach the point where their transformation becomes impossible to ignore. The animals you are watching are no longer mid-sized at all. They are shrew-sized survivors with beating hearts that race like tiny engines. Their eyes are large for seeing in the dimness. Their whiskers twitch constantly, feeling for danger. Their bodies are tiny, because tiny is the only thing the collapsing world will allow. A creature that once needed a wide territory to survive now fits its entire life into the space under a fallen log. What makes this incredible is that shrinking was never a choice. No early mammal looked at the sky darkening with ash and decided to become smaller. Instead, the world rewarded the creatures that were born with traits that matched its new harsh rules. Those rules favored the quick, the flexible, and above all, the small. By the end of the time-lapse, you would see an entire lineage transformed. Once robust animals that roamed open landscapes had become small, shadowy beings, fighting for life in the cracks and corners of a ruined world. And even though they looked fragile, they carried something powerful inside them, the ability to adapt faster than the planet could collapse. That ability would become the seed of everything mammals would eventually become. Imagine being small enough that the entire world feels like it is leaning over you, watching, waiting. Every shadow could be a predator. Every breeze could carry the scent of something hungry. Every sound could be the sign that your life is about to end. That is what it meant to live as a mouse-sized mammal in a world ruled by giants. Your body is warm-blooded, which means you burn energy fast. You are hungry the moment you wake up, and hungry when you finally curl into your nest at night. Your heartbeat races like a tiny motor that never shuts off. If you stop looking for food even for a little while, you risk running out of fuel and freezing. So you move, constantly. You squeeze into cracks and tunnels so small that bigger animals cannot follow. The world above is full of claws and teeth and thunderous footsteps, but down here in the tight places you have a chance. Not safety, just a chance. Your senses become your armor. Your whiskers sweep the air for movement. Your nose twitches non-stop, picking up the faintest smell of insects or seeds or roots. Your hearing is sharp enough to catch the sound of wings in the dark or the scrape of scales on stone. You live in a non-stop loop of searching and dodging. You dart out from hiding just long enough to grab something edible, then rush back before anything can reach you. Even drinking water is risky. You cannot sit still. You lap quickly and run because something is always hunting nearby. But there is another side to being small, a side that saves you. A giant cannot fit into the narrow cracks that you use as hallways. A predator cannot chase you into burrows the width of your own body. When the weather turns brutal and heat waves or cold snaps sweep across the land, you can bury yourself under soil or hide beneath rocks that buffer you from the worst of it. Enormous animals stumble and collapse in those moments, but you and others like you hold on in the hidden spaces. Life in the cracks also means you can live on things that others ignore. A few seeds, a beetle, a fallen berry shriveled and half rotten, a dead insect wing. Your body is so small that even scraps keep you alive long enough to see the next sunrise. And as long as you wake up again, you still have a chance to pass on your genes. Your world might be tiny, but it is full of danger and decisions. When to run, when to freeze, when to risk going out for food, when to stay hidden even though your stomach aches. Every night is a test, and every morning is proof you made the right choices. That is what survival looks like for the small ones, clinging to life in a collapsing world. Yet even in this harsh existence, something important is happening. Each generation is learning the patterns of danger and safety. Each new pup grows up faster, learns quicker, reacts sooner. The cracks you live in are shaping your species. They are making you clever. They are making you careful. They are making you into survivors with instincts that will one day shape the future of mammals everywhere. Life in the cracks is hard, but it is also powerful. It is where the small learn to outlast the giants. There is a moment every day when the world changes hands. As the sun sinks and the air cools, the great reptiles of the ancient world grow sluggish. Their bodies slow down. Their movements fade. Their eyes close and their jaws relax. Night steals their strength because cold is their enemy. But for the tiny mammals, hiding in cracks and burrows, this is the moment they have been waiting for. When darkness falls, the world finally belongs to them. Being small and warm-blooded turns night into an advantage. While the reptiles lose their energy in the cold, tiny mammals stay fast and alert. Their bodies burn like little furnaces, keeping them warm enough to move with speed even when the temperature drops. It means they can run when others cannot. They can hunt when others sleep. They can travel safely through shadows that would be deadly in daylight. What feels like danger to everything else becomes freedom for them. As they emerge from their hiding places, the night fills with new activity. Tiny paws tap across leaf litter. Noses twitch, searching for the faintest scent of food. Eyes wide open take in what little light the moon provides. Their ears turn constantly, picking up every crackle of movement. These mammals do not see night as darkness. They see it as a map filled with sounds and smells, guiding them to the things they need to survive. Their speed becomes their greatest strength. They dash from cover to cover so quickly that predators barely have time to react. The cold-blooded reptiles that ruled the day cannot match the pace of these tiny creatures once the temperature drops. A giant predator sleeping under a tree is no threat at all to something small enough to sprint past unnoticed. In the day, every step is a risk. In the night, every step is an opportunity. Food becomes easier to find too. Insects are slower. Some freeze in place. Seeds that fell during the day sit waiting on the ground. Roots are easier to dig up in the cool soil. Tiny mammals race through the darkness, gathering everything they can find. Their hunger never ends, and the night is their only chance to fill their stomachs enough to survive until the next one. As generation after generation lives this way, night starts to shape them. Their eyes grow better at catching faint light. Their whiskers become extremely sensitive. Their sense of smell becomes so powerful that they can detect the trail of a beetle or the scent of a ripe seed from far away. Evolution sharpens them into masters of darkness. If you could stand there quietly and watch, you would see an entire hidden world come alive. Thousands of tiny movements, flashes of life darting from shadow to shadow, a kingdom built not on strength but on survival, not on size but on speed and awareness. While the giants sleep, tiny mammals rule. Night becomes their shield, their hunting ground, and their home. It gives them the space to grow smarter and faster and more adaptable. It becomes the one place on Earth where smallness is not a weakness but the key to staying alive. And in this dark, secret empire, the future of mammals begins to take shape, one heartbeat at a time. If you have ever held a tiny mammal in your hand, maybe a mouse or a shrew, you can feel the heat pouring off its body. It is like holding a living spark, a creature burning energy so fast it feels almost impossible. That furious heat is not an accident. It is the price of being small and warm-blooded at the same time. A constant battle inside their bodies that shapes everything about how they live, how they think, and how they survive. The smaller an animal is, the more heat it loses to the world around it. Heat slips out through skin and fur and tiny lungs. For a large creature, losing a little warmth is not a big deal. A giant reptile can soak up heat during the day and let it fade slowly through the night. But a mouse-sized mammal cannot afford to lose even a little heat because cold steals their strength faster than any predator ever could. To stay alive, these small mammals burn fuel at a pace that feels like someone turned their internal furnace to its highest setting and broke the knob off. Their hearts beat so fast it would be deadly for any larger animal. Their lungs pull in oxygen non-stop. Their muscles twitch with energy like tightly wound springs ready to snap. But burning energy comes with a cost. They need food, and not just a little. They need it constantly. A tiny mammal that goes without food for even a few hours can slip into a dangerous state where its body temperature drops and its strength fades. For a creature living in a world filled with danger, this is a recipe for disaster. So nature gives them no choice. They must search for food all the time. They must explore every corner of their environment. They must become masters of finding calories in a world that rarely offers any for free. This endless search for food becomes the force that shapes their minds. Small mammals evolve brains built for problem solving. They learn where food hides. They remember the safest paths through the dark. They figure out how to dig into roots and crack seeds and hunt insects. Their thinking becomes fast and flexible because hesitation can mean starvation. They must take in information and react instantly. Everything in their world changes quickly. The weather, the predators, the food sources. So their brains adapt to handle these shifting patterns. Being warm-blooded and tiny also pushes them to become curious. Curiosity in these animals is not a cute personality trait. It is survival. They poke into holes. They lift leaves. They sniff at everything. They explore because the more they learn, the more they eat and the longer they live. Their behavior becomes a non-stop loop of searching and testing and learning, which creates intelligence far beyond what their size would suggest. Deep inside their bodies, tiny furnaces burn day and night, and those furnaces demand constant fuel. That demand forces these creatures to think faster, learn quicker, and make split-second decisions. It forces them to notice patterns and solve problems. Over countless generations, this pressure molds their species into some of the sharpest survivors the world has ever seen. The heat inside them is not just warmth, it is the fire that shapes their minds and fuels the evolution that will one day lead to every mammal walking the earth, including us. When mammals shrank to survive, almost everything about their bodies changed. Legs grew slimmer, bones became lighter, muscles tightened into small, wiry bundles built for quick bursts of speed. But one part of their bodies refused to shrink at the same pace: their brains. Even as their bodies transformed into tiny mouse-sized forms, their brains stayed surprisingly large for their size. This mismatch created creatures that looked small and fragile on the outside, but carried powerful mental tools on the inside. If you could hold one of these early tiny mammals in your hand, it might look like nothing more than a trembling scrap of fur. But inside its skull was a brain far more advanced than the reptiles that still ruled the world above it. While reptilian brains were built mostly for instinct and simple reactions, these mammals had brains designed for learning, remembering, and predicting. Being small forced them to think fast. Being warm-blooded forced them to find food constantly. Every moment of their lives pushed their brains to work harder and faster. Over generations, the brain became one of their most important survival weapons. Imagine navigating a dangerous world where almost everything is bigger than you. A reptile does not need to think too deeply because its size and strength do most of the work. But a tiny mammal has no such luxury. It needs to map every hiding place in its territory. It needs to remember where food appeared yesterday and where predators passed by last night. It needs to learn the sound of wings swooping overhead or the smell of something deadly waiting behind a rock. Memory becomes life. Curiosity becomes protection. Awareness becomes a constant state of being. Because their bodies shrank faster than their brains, these early mammals ended up with what scientists call a high brain-to-body ratio. In simple terms, their brains were huge for their size. This gave them complex senses that made the world feel alive with information. Their hearing sharpened so much they could detect the faint scrape of an insect walking across a leaf. Their sense of smell turned into a powerful tool that could guide them toward food or warn them about danger long before they saw it. Their whiskers became like antennas, sending detailed signals to their oversized brains. All of this made them better learners than their reptile neighbors. They could solve small problems on the fly. They could change their behavior based on past mistakes. They could teach their young through example. They could experiment with new ways of getting food and keeping themselves safe. This growing intelligence became one of the defining features of mammals. Even in their tiny forms, they were already thinking differently than the reptiles they hid from. What makes this even more incredible is that none of it was planned. No creature decided to keep a bigger brain. It simply happened because the mammals that were born with slightly larger brains were better at staying alive in a world that demanded quick decisions and constant awareness. Those individuals survived. Their young inherited those traits. And over thousands of generations, the brain took center stage. These mouse-sized survivors might have looked weak, but inside they carried the early blueprint for the intelligence that would one day shape the entire planet. Their bodies shrank, but their minds expanded in ways that would echo through every future species, including the one reading these words right now. If you were a tiny mammal living in a world filled with danger, the safest place you could ever reach was not a tree or a cave or a high branch. It was the ground itself. Being small gave mammals the one advantage that giants could never use. They could disappear underground. They could slip into narrow burrows, twist through root systems, and weave through hidden tunnels where claws, jaws, and crushing feet could not follow. These underground spaces became more than hiding spots. They became micro-fortresses carved out of soil and darkness that protected them from almost everything the collapsing world threw at them. Imagine the chaos on the surface. Heat waves so intense they scorched entire forests. Cold snaps that froze water solid in places that used to be warm. Ash falling from the sky after volcanic eruptions. Storms roaring across cracked landscapes. Predators searching desperately for food. Above-ground survival was nearly impossible for anything small and warm-blooded. But a few inches below the dirt, the world felt completely different. Temperature changed slowly there. Sound was muffled. Light did not matter. The deeper you went, the more stable everything became. A tiny mammal could curl into a nest made of leaves and moss and survive conditions that would kill almost any creature staying above ground. Their burrows worked like natural shields. When the sun blasted the world with heat, the soil kept them cool enough to breathe. When freezing winds swept across the land, the earth around them held enough warmth to keep their bodies from shutting down. Even when the sky filled with toxic ash or choking smoke, their tunnels filtered the air just enough for them to keep living. These underground fortresses were not always planned or perfect. Sometimes they were abandoned insect tunnels. Sometimes they were gaps between roots or cracks formed by shifting soil. Over time, mammals learned to dig their own networks, making them deeper and more complex with each generation. Their claws strengthened, their legs adapted for quick digging. Their sense of touch grew sharper, so they could navigate in near total darkness. Every tunnel they expanded, and every burrow they shaped, became a tiny piece of safety in a world that was constantly falling apart. The underground world also changed how they lived. Down there, everything was close together. Food scraps could be stored in side chambers. Young could be raised safely away from predators. Some tunnels connected to new food sources, like roots or buried insect colonies. In these tight spaces, tiny mammals learned to move silently and quickly. They learned to use their whiskers as guides, brushing against dirt walls to find their way. They learned to feel vibrations through their paws the way other animals use their eyes. Living underground encouraged them to think differently too. They had to remember where tunnels branched or which paths were safe. They needed to predict when to surface and when to stay hidden. Their brains wired themselves for awareness and caution. These little fortresses, built from soil and instinct, were more than shelters. They were training grounds. They taught mammals resilience and patience. They gave them a chance to survive storms that wiped out entire species. They allowed them to outlast predators far larger than themselves. While chaos raged above, these small creatures shaped a secret world below one that would keep them alive long enough to evolve into the mammals that would eventually rise again when the surface finally calmed. When the world finally began to heal after the Great Dying, it did not return to the way it had been. New forests grew where old ones had collapsed. Rivers carved fresh paths through landscapes that had been burned and broken. Life crept back slowly, filling empty spaces with plants, insects, and eventually animals. But the creatures that rose to rule this recovering world were not the small, warm-blooded mammals struggling in the cracks. The giants returned, and this time they came back as dinosaurs. As the climate stabilized, the conditions became perfect for reptiles to grow larger and stronger with every generation. Sunlight was bright and steady. Plants exploded across the land in enormous amounts. Warm temperatures stretched across continents. All of this created a world where large reptiles could thrive. They grew taller, heavier, and more powerful than anything the planet had ever seen. Some stomped through forests, knocking down trees. Others ran across plains at speeds that seemed impossible for creatures so big. Some were massive hunters, with teeth longer than your hand. Others were peaceful giants that ate enough plants in a day to feed a whole village. From above, the world looked like it belonged entirely to them. And in a way it did. Dinosaurs dominated every part of the surface. They owned the daylight. They controlled the food chains. They filled every role from tiny hunters to towering herbivores. To them, mammals were nothing more than background creatures scurrying through shadows. But for the mammals, this new age came with a hidden opportunity. Staying small was no longer a punishment, it was protection. Every giant creature on the surface lived a risky life, tied to the fragile balance of food and climate. A single drought could wipe out herds. A sudden cooling period could slow a dinosaur down until it starved. Being big meant depending on a stable world, and Earth had already proven it could change its mind without warning. Mammals were trapped in what might seem like an evolutionary underclass, but it was the safest place to be. They hid in burrows. They hunted insects at night. They ate what dinosaurs ignored. They raised young quietly far away from stomping feet and snapping jaws. While reptiles reached for greatness, mammals focused on survival. It was a quiet strategy, but it worked. Instead of growing larger, they became better at being small. Their senses sharpened. Their reflexes quickened. Their brains learned to solve problems instead of relying on strength. They became creatures of patience and adaptation, changing just enough each generation to stay alive in a world that did not want to make room for them. To an outsider, it might have looked like mammals were stuck. They were not rising, they were not ruling, they were not competing with dinosaurs for power. But that was the secret. They did not need to rule the world to survive it. While giant reptiles gambled everything on size, speed, and sunlight, mammals invested in traits that would matter far more in the long run. Years passed, then centuries, then millions of years. Dinosaurs continued to grow and compete, while mammals continued living safely in the shadows. No one watching at the time would have guessed who would eventually outlast whom, but evolution is patient, and sometimes the creatures that seem least important are the ones quietly preparing for a future no giant could ever reach. For more than 100 million years, dinosaurs ruled the surface of the planet with a confidence that seemed unshakable. They filled the forests, the plains, and the skies with bodies so large and so powerful that nothing else stood a chance at claiming the spotlight. Their shadows stretched across every ecosystem, and for all that time, mammals lived inside those shadows, hidden quiet and mostly ignored. To many people looking back, it might seem like mammals lost the evolutionary race during this era. They stayed small. They stayed nocturnal. They stayed in the background while reptiles took over the world. But this was not failure. It was strategy. A long, patient gamble that would only pay off much later. In the age of dinosaurs, mammals carved out the only roles that were safe for them. They hunted insects at night, when the air grew cool enough to slow their reptile competitors. They hid underground or in trees or inside rotting logs. They stole eggs when they could and scavenged scraps too small for dinosaurs to notice. Every day was a test of how to survive without being seen. But this way of living protected them in a world where being large or bold was dangerous. Any mammal that tried to grow bigger was quickly outcompeted or eaten. So evolution rewarded the ones who stayed tiny and flexible. Nighttime became their classroom. In the dark, they learned to use their hearing and smell instead of relying on sight. They learned to move silently and react quickly. Their brains became better at problem solving because every night was full of choices that meant life or death. These small creatures were practicing skills that would matter enormously in the future, even though no one would have realized it at the time. Meanwhile, dinosaurs were becoming specialists. Some evolved huge bodies to reach the tops of trees. Some became fast-running predators built for chasing prey in open fields. Others turned into armored tanks covered in plates and spikes. They were powerful, but they were also locked into narrow lifestyles. If the world changed even a little, many of them struggled to adapt because their bodies were built for one specific job. Mammals were the opposite. They became masters of general survival. They could eat almost anything. They could hide almost anywhere. They could change their behavior when the environment shifted. They reproduced quickly, which meant evolution could test new traits rapidly. They were not winning the world, but they were preparing for whatever came next. Generation after generation, these small survivors held on quietly. When droughts hit, mammals survived. When cold spells arrived, mammals survived. When plants changed and forests moved, mammals survived. Their ability to adjust kept them alive in situations that might have wiped out larger species. The long shadow of the dinosaurs was not a cage for mammals, it was shelter. It forced them to refine the very traits that would one day make them unstoppable. While massive reptiles placed all their bets on size and muscle, mammals invested in brains, flexibility, and patience. And when the moment finally came that the dinosaurs stumbled, it was these small, overlooked creatures that were ready to step forward. They had waited more than 100 million years for their chance, and the world had no idea what was coming. In a world ruled by giants, the only way tiny mammals could keep their place in the game of survival was by living fast and creating as many chances as possible for their species to continue. This became the mouse strategy, a way of life built on short lifespans, rapid breeding, and huge litters that turned every generation into a new experiment. When danger lurks in every shadow and predators outnumber you 100 to 1, living a long, slow life is not an option. Instead, these small mammals raced through their days, knowing that the next sunrise was never guaranteed. Their bodies were built for speed, not just on the outside, but in the way they grew and lived. A tiny mammal might be born helpless, but it developed fast learning to walk, run, and forage in record time. Every week mattered. Every moment without the ability to escape danger could be its last. So evolution pushed them to grow quickly and reproduce even quicker. Some early mammals reached adulthood in just a few months. They did not wait years to have offspring. They had babies as soon as their bodies allowed, because survival for the species depended on numbers. Big animals put a lot of care into a few children. Tiny mammals did the opposite. They had many babies because they knew most would not live long. This was not a sad truth for them, it was simply how nature worked. Their job was to give life as many chances as possible. If one pup was born with a slightly better sense of smell, that trait might help the entire species in the future. If another pup was faster or better at digging, that trait could spread too. Every litter became a set of evolutionary tests, running in parallel across the entire population. Because they reproduced so quickly, evolution moved through them like a rushing river. Thousands of small changes appeared in every generation. One trait might help them find food faster, another might help them escape a predator by a fraction of a second. Some changes did nothing. Some made their lives harder, but the ones that helped even a little were passed on. Over time, this constant cycle of birth and survival shaped mammals into creatures that could adapt in ways dinosaurs never could. This fast life strategy also meant mammals lived without hesitation. In the dark of night, when the giants slept, they darted through forests, searching for insects, seeds, and anything edible. They learned by doing. They learned by failing. They learned by trying again the next night. Their brains grew sharper because every problem they solved helped them survive long enough to raise the next generation. Their instincts became more flexible. Their behavior became more creative. They were always adjusting, always refining, always improving. In this way, the mouse strategy became a secret engine of evolution. It allowed mammals to explore new ideas constantly through their own bodies. While the giants were trapped in slow life cycles, tiny mammals moved through hundreds of generations in the same time. They became a species that could experiment with life at high speed. And hidden within these fast, short lives were the early sparks of the intelligence, curiosity, and adaptability that would one day help mammals rise far beyond the shadows where they first survived. When mammals shrank to survive, they did not just become smaller versions of the creatures they once were. Their entire bodies transformed into compact survival machines where every millimeter served a purpose. In a world full of predators that towered over them, tiny mammals needed more than speed and hiding spots. They needed tools built into their bodies that could guide them through darkness, warn them of danger, and help them find food in places where almost nothing seemed to exist. Out of this pressure came tiny toolkits, sets of micro-adaptations that made these little creatures far more capable than their size suggested. The first tool was their claws. Not giant hooked weapons, but small, sharp extensions designed for digging, gripping, and climbing. These claws let mammals scratch into soil and tear through roots to reach food hidden underground. They allowed them to claw their way into burrows when danger appeared. They helped them climb trees or fallen logs, to scout for insects crawling in the cracks. Sharp claws gave them access to a three-dimensional world where every surface could be explored. Being tiny meant big predators could not follow them into the narrowest spaces, and their claws turned those spaces into safe zones. Then there were the whiskers. If you ever watch a mouse up close, you will see its whiskers twitching constantly. They are not simple hairs. They are sensors connected directly to nerves that send information to the brain faster than almost anything else. Every whisker acts like a feeler, sending details about airflow, the shape of tunnels, and the movement of prey or predators nearby. In complete darkness, a tiny mammal can navigate as if it sees with its whole face. When a predator breathes or shifts its weight, the whiskers detect it. When a tunnel narrows, the whiskers feel it, long before the mammal gets stuck. These tiny hairs became one of the greatest tools evolution ever gave small mammals. But the senses went even further. Their hearing grew so sharp that they could detect the flutter of insect wings or the faint rustle of a predator's footstep. Sound became a map. Every noise in their world told a story about what was happening nearby. A single crack in a leaf could send them running. A steady hum could lead them to food. Their ears became instruments tuned to the faintest clues. Their noses also evolved beyond anything reptiles could match. A tiny mammal could smell trails left hours earlier. It could detect whether a scent meant food, danger, or another mammal passing through. This sense of smell worked like radar, allowing them to understand their world even when they could not see it. In dark forests or underground tunnels, scent became the language of survival. All these tools worked together. A mammal might catch a scent and follow it with quick light steps. Its whiskers would scan the path ahead. Its ears would listen for threats hiding in the brush. Its claws allowed it to flee upward, downward, or sideways the moment danger appeared. Nothing went to waste. Nothing existed without purpose. Every tiny feature of their bodies had been shaped by millions of years of fear, hunger, and adaptation. What looked like a small, fragile creature was actually a finely tuned survival machine, capable of doing things that giants never could. These toolkits became the foundation for what mammals would one day evolve into. They carried the early versions of senses and skills that later species, including humans, would build upon. In the smallest bodies, evolution had packed some of the most remarkable abilities the animal kingdom had ever seen. When you are the smallest creature in a world ruled by giants, you cannot afford to be picky. A mouse-sized mammal, living millions of years ago, did not have the luxury of waiting for the perfect meal, or hunting only one type of prey. Hunger was constant, and the tiny furnace inside its warm-blooded body needed fuel every hour. That meant eating anything with even a trace of calories. Seeds, insects, roots, eggs, fallen fruit, tiny lizards, anything. This was not a choice. It was survival. And over time, this ability to eat everything became one of the greatest superpowers mammals ever evolved. In the world after the great extinctions, food was unpredictable. Some nights the ground was littered with seeds from plants recovering after chaos. Other nights the land was empty. Insects might be everywhere one week, then vanish the next. Roots might be soft and easy to reach, or buried deep in hard soil. A small mammal that specialized in one kind of food would starve the moment that food disappeared. But a generalist, a creature willing to nibble anything it found, could survive almost any change the planet threw at it. Imagine being that creature. You emerge at night starving because your tiny body burned through its last meal hours ago. You race through the dark, letting your whiskers guide you. You sniff the air for anything that smells edible. You scratch at the soil and find a few beetle larvae. They are soft and full of fat, perfect for the energy you need. A few minutes later, you find seeds blown in by the wind. They taste different, but they keep your body warm for a little longer. Then you find a patch of roots exposed by a fallen branch. They are tough, but your sharp teeth can handle them. This constant switching between food sources trains your brain to be flexible. You must remember where food appeared yesterday, even if it is gone today. You must learn which plants are safe and which ones are poisonous. You must explore constantly because your next meal could be anywhere. Every night becomes a puzzle, and solving it keeps you alive long enough to raise the next generation. Being an omnivore also helps when predators are everywhere. If a giant reptile blocks your usual feeding spot, you do not panic. You simply go somewhere else and eat something new. If insects are hiding deep underground because of cold weather, you dig for roots instead. If seeds are plentiful during one season, you feast on them, but when the season changes, you move on. Nothing traps you. No single food source controls your life. Over millions of years, this flexibility becomes baked into the biology of tiny mammals. Their teeth evolve into shapes that can bite many kinds of food. Their claws adapt for digging and climbing. Their noses sharpen to detect scents from multiple food types. Their brains grow to store information about dozens of feeding strategies. While giant reptiles depended on specific plants or specific prey, tiny mammals operated like scavengers, hackers, and explorers all at once. They were nature's problem solvers, always ready to change their diet the moment the environment shifted. This gave them a massive advantage, not just in the age of dinosaurs, but in every age that followed. The generalist lifestyle was messy and unpredictable, but it kept them alive in a world where specialization meant extinction. Eating everything was not just a habit. It was a survival code, a way of living that allowed mammals to endure the darkest ages of Earth and eventually rise into creatures capable of conquering every continent. 66 million years ago, the sky betrayed the world. Imagine looking up and seeing a point of light racing toward Earth, faster than anything you can imagine. It grows brighter and brighter until the entire horizon turns white. Then everything ends. The asteroid that struck the planet was bigger than a mountain, and it hit with a force so powerful it made the ground ripple like water. Forests burst into flames instantly. Shock waves flattened entire continents. The ocean rose in towering walls that swallowed coastlines. For the giant dinosaurs ruling the world, this moment was the beginning of their final chapter. But for the tiny mouse-sized mammals hiding underground, this was the moment they had unknowingly been preparing for all along. When the asteroid hit, the world was thrown into chaos. Firestorms raged across the land. Ash and dust blasted into the sky and wrapped the planet in thick darkness. Sunlight faded until day and night looked almost the same. Plants could not grow. Temperatures dropped. Food chains collapsed from the bottom up. Anything that needed large amounts of food or wide open territory began to starve. The giants were doomed not because they were weak, but because the world they depended on vanished in a single strike. But deep underground, in winding burrows and cracks in the soil, tiny mammals curled into nests and survived the first wave of destruction. Their bodies were small enough to squeeze into safe spaces. Their thick fur kept them warm when the world above froze. Their claws let them dig deeper when danger came too close. And because they could eat almost anything, they did not depend on sunlight or seasons to keep them alive. They ate roots that remained untouched beneath the surface. They hunted insects hiding in the soil. They scavenged anything the catastrophe left behind. In the pitch-black world that followed the impact, these tiny creatures had everything evolution had trained them for. Their ears could hear movement even when sight was useless. Their noses could find food buried under layers of ash. Their whiskers guided them through tunnels when the air itself was too thick with dust to breathe easily. They did not panic because fear had always been a part of their lives. Danger was familiar. Change was normal. Above ground, giant dinosaurs tried to survive, but the world had turned against them. Without plants, herbivores died. Without herbivores, predators starved. Animals the size of trucks and buses simply could not adapt fast enough. Each passing month pushed them closer to extinction, while the small mammals continued their quiet fight for survival below. The darkness lasted for years, but the mammals endured. Their fast lives and rapid breeding created new generations, ready to face the harsh new planet. Slowly, the skies cleared. Sunlight returned. Plants sprouted once more. And when the world finally opened up, a new age began. The giants were gone, but the small survivors remained. These mouse-sized mammals crawled out of their burrows into a planet filled with empty ecosystems waiting to be claimed. They were not strong, they were not big, but they were alive, and that alone made them the future. When the darkness finally began to lift, the world looked nothing like the one that had existed before. The great dinosaurs who once thundered across the land were gone. The sky was still hazy, and the air still tasted of dust, but sunlight reached the ground again. Plants pushed through the ash in tiny green shoots. Life was trying to start over. And from the safety of their underground shelters, the tiny mammals who had survived the chaos began to crawl out into a planet that felt like an empty stage after the actors had vanished. For the first time in millions of years, there were no giant predators roaring through forests. No herds of massive plant-eaters pounding the earth. No shadows cast by creatures taller than trees. The silence was strange and almost unsettling. But for the tiny survivors, this silence was also an invitation. The world was full of open spaces that no creature claimed. Every ecological job, from hunter to seed-eater to scavenger, was waiting for whoever was brave enough and adaptable enough to take it. The food chains had collapsed so completely that rebuilding them would require new shapes, new behaviors, and new ideas. The first mammals to emerge from the burrows moved cautiously. They sniffed the ground where giant reptiles once walked. They climbed over bones that had already begun to crumble. They explored forests that were burned down to skeletons. Even though the world was wounded, it was also safe in a way they had never known. There were no enormous predators to chase them, no heavy footsteps to send them running for shelter. It was like walking into a world reset to zero. At first, food was scarce. Plants had only just begun to grow again, and the animals that depended on those plants had not yet returned. But the mammals had been built for times like this. They dug for insects beneath logs. They found seeds buried before the disaster. They gnawed on roots that had survived deep underground. Every meal helped them recover from generations of starvation and stress. Their small bodies healed. Their fast breeding cycles kicked in. New generations arrived quickly, each one better suited to the recovering earth. Slowly the land transformed. Ferns and shrubs spread across empty plains. Trees began to grow again. With plant life returning, insect populations exploded, which meant more food for hungry mammals. With every passing year, the survivors explored farther and adapted more. Some mammals learned to climb trees to reach the fresh leaves and fruits appearing in the new forests. Others dug deeper burrows to raise litters safely beneath the ground. Some became swift runners across open fields. Each exploring group was performing a silent experiment, guided by evolution testing which traits would thrive in this fresh new world. What made this moment in history so powerful is that nearly every niche was available. With dinosaurs gone, mammals were not pushed into the shadows anymore. They were free to rise, free to grow, free to experiment. The world after giants was not just an empty planet. It was a giant opportunity. From these tiny creatures exploring a wounded Earth would come the ancestors of predators, grazers, climbers, swimmers, and eventually the primates who would shape the future. The age of giants had ended, but the age of possibility had just begun. When the dinosaurs vanished, they left behind more than bones and empty landscapes. They left behind freedom. For the first time in more than 100 million years, mammals could move through the world without constantly dodging the footsteps of giants. There were no towering predators waiting to pounce, no massive herbivores eating every plant in sight, no shadows cast by creatures that owned the day. The world was open and overflowing with possibilities. And evolution, which had been locked into tiny bodies for so long, finally loosened its grip. For millions of years, mammals had been forced to stay small, simply to survive. Being tiny kept them hidden from giant hunters and allowed them to escape into burrows and cracks when danger appeared. Their world was built for bodies the size of mice. Every strategy they used, every behavior they learned, and every adaptation they developed came from living under constant threat. But now that threat was gone. The pressure to stay small lifted like a weight finally taken off their backs. At first, the mammals did not grow much. Generations had lived so tiny for so long that life still felt safer close to the ground. But the world around them was changing faster than ever. Plants spread across continents. Insects multiplied into countless species. The soil was rich with nutrients, and new forests grew thick and green. There was food everywhere, and space everywhere, and no giant reptiles competing for it. In this world, being a little bigger was no longer a disadvantage. It was an opportunity. Over thousands of years, small changes began to appear. A mammal born with slightly longer legs could cover more ground while searching for food. One with a stronger jaw could eat tougher plants and seeds. A species that grew just a little larger could reach fruits and leaves that smaller animals could not. These advantages gave some lineages a head start in the new world. They survived more easily. They raised more young. And with each generation their size increased bit by bit. It did not happen all at once. It looked more like a slow release of pressure that had been building for millions of years. Evolution, which had been forced to work within strict limits, suddenly had room to explore. Mammals began to diversify in ways the world had never seen before. Some grew into fast-running predators, hunting across open plains. Others became sturdy plant-eaters, chewing through the new forests. Some returned to the trees where they climbed and leapt through branches. A few even ventured back toward the water, learning to swim and eventually becoming the ancestors of dolphins and whales. This growth was not simple expansion. It was nature experimenting again and again, testing what shapes would thrive in a world finally free from reptilian rule. The evolutionary spring that had been compressed during the age of dinosaurs snapped open, sending mammals into every direction at once. Tiny forms remained because tiny still worked. But medium and large forms appeared too, each one shaped by the opportunities and challenges of the new ecosystem spreading across the planet. Looking back, this moment is one of the most dramatic transitions in Earth's history. The survivors who once hid in darkness now stepped into the daylight. They claimed roles once held by giants and created new ones no creature had ever filled. Growing back up was not just about size. It was about taking the first steps toward becoming the dominant creatures the world would one day know. Evolution had waited a long time for this moment, and the mammals were ready. When mammals finally had the chance to grow larger after the dinosaurs disappeared, it might seem obvious that every lineage would take that path. Why stay tiny when the world was wide open and full of food and sunlight, with no giant predators ruling the land? But evolution does not work like a simple ladder where bigger always means better. For many mammal lineages, staying small was the smarter choice. For them, mouse-sized was not a leftover from the past. It was a winning strategy that kept them alive in places bigger animals could never reach. Small mammals had spent millions of years perfecting the art of being tiny. They knew how to live fast, raise many young, and adapt to almost any environment. When the world changed after the Great Extinction, these skills did not suddenly become useless. In fact, they became even more important. With ecosystems empty and resources scattered, the creatures that could reproduce quickly and explore new niches, the fastest, had an immediate advantage. Larger mammals took generations to grow and establish themselves, but small mammals could test out new lifestyles with every litter. Picture a forest recovering after the asteroid impact. Plants are spreading, but the environment is unstable. Some areas are still too cold or too dry. Others are full of insects but lack shelter. For a large animal, these risks are enormous. But a tiny mammal can move and test the area and leave within a day if the resources run out. Staying small means staying flexible. It means being able to slip through cracks both literally and metaphorically. Evolution rewarded that flexibility. Small mammals could hide in underground tunnels or squeeze into spaces between roots. They could climb into bushes that were too thin to support larger creatures. They could feed on seeds, insects, mushrooms, and scraps that no bigger animal wanted. Their whole world was built on discovering opportunities that others overlooked. And because they gave birth to many young in short lifespans, each generation could adjust to new changes almost instantly. Some lineages doubled down on this strategy and perfected it. They evolved sharper senses, faster reflexes, and bodies designed for quick, unpredictable movements. They became nocturnal to avoid the new medium-sized predators rising in the fresh ecosystems. They remained generalists, eating almost anything, because being picky could mean starvation. What makes this even more impressive is how successful the small strategy became over time. Even today, millions of years after the Age of Giants ended, the planet is still dominated by small mammals in sheer numbers. Mice, shrews, voles, bats, and tiny marsupials occupy ecosystems from rainforests to deserts. They fill roles that larger mammals cannot. They spread seeds, build soil ecosystems, and control insect populations. Their size is not a weakness. It is a finely tuned survival design. Staying small gave them speed. It gave them safety. It gave them the ability to live in the hidden layers of every environment. While some mammal lineages grew into wolves, horses, elephants, and whales, others quietly kept doing what had always worked best. They lived fast, reproduced often, and slipped into every shadow and crevice of the natural world. Not everyone gets big, because not everyone needs to. For many mammals, the mouse-sized lifestyle became the ultimate evolutionary success. It allowed them to survive global extinctions, outsmart predators, adapt to climate shifts, and thrive in places bigger creatures could never reach. In the story of mammals, being small was not a leftover. It was a strategy, one that shaped the world just as powerfully as any giant ever did. If you ever want proof that evolution never stops playing with the rules, that you only need to look at islands. These isolated pieces of land, scattered across oceans, act like miniature worlds where the laws of survival twist into strange new shapes. On the mainland, animals grow or shrink for reasons tied to predators, climate, and food. But on islands, everything changes. Isolation becomes a pressure all its own, and limited resources turn evolution into an artist with a wild imagination. That is why islands have given us elephants, the size of cows, deer as small as house cats, and rodents that grow so large they look like creatures from prehistoric forests. When a large animal reaches an island, it carries with it the habits and expectations of the mainland. But the island does not care about its past. Food is limited. Space is tight. Predators might be absent or extremely rare. In these conditions, being huge is not a strength, it is a burden. Large animals need lots of food, and if that food runs out, they starve quickly. So generation after generation, the big ones shrink. Their bones become lighter, their bodies become smaller, their lifespans grow shorter, and slowly an animal that once towered over the land becomes something new. One of the most famous examples is the dwarf elephants found on islands in the Mediterranean. Their ancestors were giants, but once they arrived on islands like Cyprus and Sicily, they shrank until some adults stood no taller than a cow. Their size matched the resources around them. The island forced them to become miniature versions of their former selves, not out of weakness, but out of efficiency. Being smaller kept them alive. The opposite also happens. When small animals reach an island with no predators, they sometimes grow larger than anyone expects. Rodents especially take advantage of these conditions. With no owls or snakes or cats to hunt them, they can afford to grow big. A larger body helps them travel farther and eat a wider range of plants. Some island rodents became giants as heavy as small dogs, towering over their mainland relatives, without constant danger pushing them to stay. Tiny evolution let them stretch into new forms. Deer show one of the strangest transformations of all. On some islands, they shrink into delicate creatures, barely larger than rabbits. On others, they grow bigger because vegetation and climate push them in that direction. The same species can evolve in opposite ways depending on the island's rules. That is what makes islands such powerful laboratories for evolution. They replay the old story of shrinking and growing over and over again, revealing how flexible mammal bodies really are. Every island is like a new experiment. Different climate, different predators, different plants, different pressures. Over thousands of years, mammals reshape themselves to fit perfectly into these environments. They shrink when smallness is smarter. They grow when size offers an advantage. They adapt until they match the island's rhythm. These strange miniature worlds remind us of the time when all mammals were forced to shrink for survival. The islands repeat that ancient story in fast forward, showing how quickly evolution can rewrite a body when resources demand it. And they prove that smallness is not just a fallback strategy. It is a powerful answer to the challenges of living in a world where survival is never guaranteed. If you walk through a forest today, you might think the most important animals are the big ones, the deer grazing in clearings, the fox slipping between trees, the wolves whose tracks hint at silent hunts. But if every large animal vanished, the forest would still stand for a while. If the tiny mammals disappeared, everything would collapse almost instantly. That is the secret of the modern world. The smallest mammals, the ones we rarely notice, are the hidden architects, holding entire ecosystems together, just as their ancestors once held on during ancient crises. Look at a single mouse running through the underbrush. It might seem insignificant, but every seed it carries in its cheek pouch becomes a potential tree. When it hides seeds to eat later and forgets them, those seeds sprout in new places. Tiny mammals unknowingly plant future forests every night. They spread the seeds of shrubs, grasses, and trees farther than the wind can blow them. Without them, plants would struggle to move into new areas after storms, floods, or fires. They are nature's gardeners, doing work no one sees but everyone depends on. Then there are the insect eaters. Shrews, voles, and small marsupials eat insects at a pace that feels almost unbelievable. A single shrew can devour its entire body weight in insects in a day. Multiply that by millions, and you have a silent army keeping insect populations under control. Without small mammals, forests and grasslands would be overrun by insects chewing through leaves and roots faster than plants could recover. These tiny predators are the reason ecosystems stay balanced year after year. Small mammals also hold a critical spot in the food web. They are the main food source for owls, snakes, foxes, wildcats, and dozens of other predators. Their constant reproduction and fast life cycles keep these predators alive, even during harsh seasons. If the tiny mammals disappeared, the predators depending on them would starve and vanish. And without predators, the populations of other animals would explode, causing even more imbalance. Everything is connected, and the connection often starts with creatures small enough to hide in your hand. But the influence of tiny mammals goes deeper. When they dig tunnels, they mix and aerate the soil. This makes it easier for plants to grow and helps water soak into the ground. When they build nests or burrows, other animals use those shelters. When they nibble on plants, they encourage new growth. Their constant movement spreads nutrients across landscapes in ways large animals cannot. These roles might seem small, but together they form the backbone of life on Earth. In every forest, every grassland, every desert, tiny mammals perform millions of tasks that keep ecosystems functioning. They are descendants of survivors who learned how to adapt to chaos, eat anything, move quietly, and reproduce quickly. The same qualities that kept them alive during ancient disasters now help modern ecosystems stay strong. The world does not belong only to the biggest or the loudest creatures. It depends on the quiet workers who slip through the shadows, shaping life without being noticed. Today's tiny mammals carry on a legacy that began more than 200 million years ago. They survived the worst events the planet ever faced, and now they make sure everything else survives too. Being small saved the earliest mammals from extinction more than once, but it also came with a cost so heavy that every tiny creature alive today still pays it. Being mouse-sized is not a peaceful, quiet life. It is an endless sprint where every heartbeat matters and every shadow could mean danger. Evolution gave small mammals incredible advantages, but none of those advantages were free. Their bodies, their behavior, and even their lifespans were shaped by the constant pressure of survival. The first price of being small is short life. A tiny mammal burns energy faster than almost any creature on Earth. Its heart races, its lungs pump non-stop, and its body stays warm only by burning food every hour of the day. This furious metabolism means there is no such thing as taking it slow. Most small mammals live only a few months or a couple of years at most. Even in perfect conditions, their bodies simply wear out. Their internal engines were designed for speed, not longevity. They must live fast because they do not live long. The second price is constant fear. Predators target small mammals more than almost any other animal. Birds of prey, snakes, foxes, coyotes, wildcats, even larger mammals, all see tiny creatures as easy meals. From the moment they are born, they are hunted. Every night is a gamble. Every noise is a warning. Every decision has to be made in an instant. Staying still too long means being caught. Moving at the wrong moment means being seen. Their sharp senses evolved because they needed to detect danger before it found them, but even that is not always enough. Then there is the fragility of their bodies. A single fall can break them. A sudden cold snap can kill them. A few hours without food can send them into starvation. Their size, which allows them to hide, also makes them delicate. They survive by avoiding damage, not by enduring it. Larger animals can afford injuries and recover slowly. Small mammals rarely get second chances. Their bones are thin, their skin is soft, and their strength is limited. Their reproduction strategy also carries a heavy burden. Because they live short lives, they must produce many young quickly. But raising young drains enormous energy and puts mothers at constant risk. Many babies never survive their first weeks. Predators steal nests, weather wipes out litters, food shortages force parents to abandon their young. It is harsh, but it is the only way the species survives. Evolution chose quantity over safety because that was the only strategy that worked at their size. Even their intelligence, which seems like a gift, comes with a price. A fast brain means high energy demand. A small mammal must eat constantly to fuel its thinking. The curiosity that keeps them alive can also lead them into danger. They explore because they must, not because they want to. Learning new things is necessary, but every new experience could also be their last. Yet despite all these costs, the mouse strategy remains one of evolution's most successful designs. Being small lets mammals slip into niches no large animal can reach. It lets them outlast disasters and rebuild ecosystems after extinctions. Their lives are short, but their impact is enormous. The price of being small is high. It demands speed, awareness, flexibility, and constant risk. But for millions of years it has worked. It kept early mammals alive when giants fell, and it keeps modern ecosystems running today. Evolution never gives gifts without a price, but sometimes the price is worth paying because the reward is survival itself. If you look at a human being today, you would never guess that our distant ancestors once scurried through the darkness no bigger than a mouse. We stand tall, we build cities, we explore planets. But hidden inside our bodies and minds are echoes of the time when survival depended on being tiny, fast, and endlessly adaptable. The strategies perfected by those early miniaturized mammals did not vanish when some of their descendants grew larger. They were carried forward generation after generation until they ended up in us. Start with metabolism. Humans are warm-blooded creatures with bodies that work hard to keep a steady temperature, just like our mouse-sized ancestors did. We eat many times a day not because we are weak, but because our warm-blooded system demands constant fuel. If you skip meals, you start to feel slow, cold, and tired. That reaction comes from deep evolutionary memory. Our tiny ancestors could not afford to miss even a single feeding because their high-energy bodies would drop into danger. We inherited a gentler version of that same urgency. Then there is our diet. Humans are famously flexible eaters. We can survive on meat-heavy diets, or plant-heavy diets, or mixtures of both. We can eat fruit, roots, seeds, insects, grains, and thousands of combinations that other animals would never touch. This is not random. It comes from the era when being picky meant extinction. The generalist diet that saved our tiny ancestors became part of our biology. Our teeth reflect it, our stomachs reflect it, our instincts reflect it. We explore food the way those early mammals explored forests, tasting anything that might keep us alive. Our brains hold even stronger echoes of miniaturization. When mammals shrank their bodies, their brains refused to shrink at the same speed. That meant a tiny creature ended up with a relatively large brain capable of learning, remembering, and problem-solving in ways reptiles never could. That brain power helped them survive in a world stacked against them. Over millions of years, those oversized brains became more complex, sharpening senses and giving mammals a mental edge. Humans did not invent intelligence from nothing. We inherited the blueprint from creatures who needed every ounce of thinking power just to make it through the night. Even our instincts show this ancient history. Humans notice movement in the corner of their vision faster than details in the center, and that comes from a time when a rustling shadow could be a predator. We react to sudden sounds before we even know what we heard. We remember dangerous experiences more easily than safe ones. We feel uneasy in complete darkness because our ancestors lived in a world where darkness belonged to predators and survival meant staying alert. Our ability to cooperate is another echo. Tiny mammals survived extinction events by working in small groups, sharing warmth, knowledge, and food. Humans do the same on a much larger scale. We form families, tribes, communities, and nations because the instinct to survive together is older than our species. Even curiosity traces back to those early days. A tiny mammal explored because it had to. Food might be hidden under leaves, inside logs, or down narrow tunnels. Curiosity was not entertainment, it was survival. Humans inherited that drive to explore and turned it into science, travel, and discovery. We are the descendants of creatures who lived because they asked questions about their environment every single night. When you add all of this together, a strange truth appears. Humans feel like a species shaped by intelligence, tools, and culture, but under all of that, we are shaped by something much older. The patterns wired into our bodies and minds were forged when our ancestors were tiny refugees hiding from giants. We walk on two legs now. We speak languages and build civilizations. But deep inside, we still carry the survival strategies of small, warm-blooded creatures who learned how to adapt to a dangerous world. The story of ancient miniaturization is not just about them, it is about us. If you want to know where evolution might be heading next, you do not need to look millions of years into the future. You only need to look around right now. As the planet warms and weather swings grow more extreme, something familiar is happening. Some animals are shrinking. It sounds strange because the world today feels dominated by large creatures, but the pattern is repeating itself. When environments become harsh, unpredictable, and unstable, small often wins. It is the same rule that once pushed ancient mammals into mouse-sized bodies to survive disasters that nearly wiped life off the map. Climate change is not just about higher temperatures. It is about chaotic swings, long droughts, sudden storms, heat waves that break records again and again, food shortages that ripple through ecosystems. In conditions like these, big bodies become a liability. Large animals need more food and more space. Their bodies overheat faster. Their long lifespans make adaptation slow. If a drought wipes out a food source, a big creature might not live long enough for the environment to recover. Small animals face danger too, but they carry advantages. They need less food. They reproduce faster. Their bodies release heat easily. They can slip into shade, hide underground, and survive on scraps. This is why scientists are noticing something important. Birds in some regions are becoming slightly smaller than they were decades ago. Insects show the same trend in places hit hardest by heat waves. Even some mammals are beginning to shrink as food becomes less predictable. It is not dramatic yet, but evolution rarely starts with drama. It starts with tiny changes building over generations. Think about a bird living in a warming forest. Larger birds struggle because they overheat quickly and require lots of food to stay active. Smaller birds lose heat faster and need less energy to survive. Over time, the smaller ones are more likely to raise young successfully. Their genes spread. The population shrinks in size without anyone noticing until scientists compare old measurements and new ones and realize something subtle but important is happening. Or picture animals living in the Arctic where warming is happening faster than almost anywhere else. Food patterns have changed. Ice disappears earlier each year. Some species cannot travel or hunt the way they used to. For small mammals, though, the shift is different. They stay hidden in tunnels. They eat whatever they find. Their bodies adjust quickly because their life cycles are short. They can evolve in a handful of generations, while larger species struggle for decades. Shrinking is not always a good thing. It can be a sign of stress, of ecosystems pushed to their limits, of animals surviving but barely thriving. But in evolutionary terms, shrinking can also be a lifeline. It allows species to fit into new realities rather than being crushed by them. It mirrors what happened hundreds of millions of years ago when ancient mammals shrank to survive global catastrophes. Humans are watching these changes unfold, but nature is living them. The old pattern is repeating because the rules of survival have never changed. When the world becomes chaotic, flexibility beats strength, speed beats size, small beats big more often than anyone expects. Evolution does not care about beauty or power, or what creatures once were. It cares about what works right now. If the planet keeps warming, the future might belong to creatures that can adapt quickly and live lightly, not the giants, but the small survivors. The same kind of creatures that once hid from dinosaurs and outlived them. The story of shrinking is not ancient history. It is happening today, and it may shape the world of tomorrow, just as it shaped the world long before humans ever appeared. When people imagine evolution, they often picture a climb toward greatness, where creatures get bigger, stronger, and more powerful with every generation. But nature has never worked that way. Evolution is not a ladder. It is a maze. And sometimes the path that leads to survival goes downward, not upward. The age of mouse-sized mammals is the perfect reminder that being small is not a defeat. It is a strategy. A powerful one that has saved entire lineages from extinction again and again. When disaster struck the ancient world and giants fell, it was the tiny, warm-blooded creatures hiding in shadows and burrows who outlived everything else. Their strength did not come from size or muscle. It came from adaptability. They could eat anything. They could slip into places where danger could not reach them. They could reproduce quickly and evolve faster than the world could destroy them. This ability to bend instead of break kept them alive through volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, and global climate chaos. The power of small lies in flexibility. Big animals depend on stable environments. They need steady food sources, large territories, and predictable seasons. When the world shifts suddenly, they struggle to adjust. But small creatures can change direction instantly. They can survive in tight spaces with fewer resources and less certainty. They can move underground or become nocturnal or switch diets in a single generation. They are not locked into one way of living. Even intelligence, the trait humans are so proud of, has roots in tiny bodies. When mammals shrank, their brains did not shrink as quickly. That meant early small mammals ended up with relatively large brains full of curiosity and problem-solving skills. Those brains helped them survive in a world where danger was everywhere. And millions of years later, those same qualities helped humans build civilizations. Our ability to learn, adapt, cooperate, and explore began when our ancestors were nothing more than small survivors trying to stay alive in the dark. The legacy of smallness also shows up in ecosystems today. Tiny mammals keep forests healthy by spreading seeds, controlling insects, and building soil through their burrows. They quietly support entire food webs without ever standing in the spotlight. Their bodies may be fragile, but their impact is enormous. Without them, ecosystems would collapse from the ground up. Smallness is not just a physical trait, it is a reminder of what truly matters in a changing world. Speed, flexibility, curiosity, resilience, the courage to move through darkness and try new things, the willingness to let go of what used to work and adapt to what works now. These qualities define the success of small mammals, and they continue to define survival in every era, including our own. As the climate shifts again and ecosystems reshape themselves, the lesson remains the same. Evolution does not reward the biggest. It rewards the adaptable. The creatures that survive are not the ones that dominate. but the ones that can change. The age of mouse-sized mammals was not a temporary glitch in Earth's history. It was a demonstration of nature's deepest truth. Sometimes survival means shrinking. Sometimes power comes from smallness. And sometimes the future belongs not to the giants, but to the quiet, persistent survivors who know how to bend without breaking.